Welcome to Empowered Motherhood, Fertility, Pregnancy, and Parenthood for the Modern Mum. I'm Hannah, and today we are going to get familiar with our hormones, our reproductive hormones to be specific. In many cultures or families, the menstrual cycle can be really a taboo subject. And even for many of us who haven't grown up in that sort of environment, it can still be something that's kind of hard to talk about. So I want to get us talking about our menstrual cycle and feeling okay about talking about it because it's really important for fertility. And so some of the reasons that we can find it really hard to talk about our menstrual cycle or feel okay chatting about it is that we actually don't understand a heck of a lot about how our menstrual cycle is connected to our fertility. So with my trusty whiteboard here, my mother was a teacher, and I have this kind of secret desire to be a teacher. So indulge me for a second. But we're going to use it to take a look at how our hormones play a role in our menstrual cycle and our fertility. So our menstrual cycle is a mix of our physiology. So that is our female reproductive organs. So you've got your ovaries, you've got your fallopian tubes that come down here, and then you've got your really happy uterus right there. So it's a mix of this and our hormones. And our hormones are the workers who keep our reproductive factory ticking along from month to month. So I'm just going to stick my happy little uterus up here for the moment. Reproductive organs, not just uterus. So we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of the different lengths of cycles right now, or even necessarily how hormone levels may impact fertility in depth. We keep a lookout for those topics in other weeks. Instead, we're just going to base this conversation around what most people say is a generalized 28-day cycle. However, it's really important to note, I want you to note this is very, very much generalized. And many of you will have quite different cycle lengths, and that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with that. So day 1 is the first day of your period or bleed. And during this time, your hormones are all quite low. So down here. All right, you can see they're all quite low. However, follicle stimulating hormone, and I'm going to call him Frankie, starts to become a little bit more active. So here's Frankie here, and you can see he's the guy in orange. So Frankie's job, I'm going to stick Frankie here, is to wake up our ovaries, these little guys on the end, and make them start growing follicles. And one of those follicles is going to release a mature egg. So we've got lots of follicles. You want to get to the dominant follicle that's producing the mature egg. So Frankie quietly works away for the first half of our cycle. And then Esther, that's our estrogen, starts to perk up when our bleed has stopped. And she is produced by those growing follicles. So understandably, Esther in blue is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as we produce more follicles. And she's responsible for 2 things. She's prepping our uterus to be ready for the fertilized egg. And she's also going to trigger 2 other really helpful hormones. So let's pop Esther here. She's our blue one. Now, Esther triggers Frankie here to do a little jump right before ovulation. She also triggers Larry. Now, Larry is our luteinizing hormone. And Larry has one job right now, and that's to trigger ovulation. So Larry's actually very important in reproductive development in both men and women. But for now, we're just going to focus on his role in the menstrual cycle. So here's Larry up here doing a big jump. So Larry jumps into action and triggers that dominant follicle to release its mature egg. And that's ovulation. So here we've got, this is going to be our dominant follicle. And this egg comes shooting out of the ovary into the fallopian tube. And this is going to mark the second half of our menstrual cycle and technically the end of our most fertile period. And again, that's something I'll talk about in another video. But the egg starts to move its way down the fallopian tube towards the uterus. Now, if you're trying to conceive and you're not on contraception, then this is the time that the egg hopefully will meet the sperm and become fertilized. going to take a wee sip of my drink. So what happens next? Well, you're going to meet the last hormone in our group, and this is poly. Poly is progesterone. Okay, so poly here is purple, and poly does a jump in the second half. Now, the level of progesterone increases after ovulation, and this is because poly here is essential for an embryo to implant into the uterus and be maintained. And she does this by thickening the uterus and giving it a really good blood supply. She also decreases muscle contractions of that uterus wall so that it doesn't get rid of the embryo that's trying to implant itself. Now, poly is actually produced at first by the corpus luteum. Now, that's the empty follicle that's left behind once the eggs come shooting out into the fallopian tube. And over the second half of that cycle, those corpus luteum break down, and so the level of poly here starts to decrease. Now, as you can imagine, when poly starts to decrease, this signals the uterus that there's no embryo in there, and so the uterus wall starts to shed. And that's when we come back to day 1, which is our periodal bleed, that shedding of the uterus. So we're back to day 1 of our menstrual cycle. Now, if we were to be pregnant, so let's go back to the fact that the sperm has actually met the egg, then the developing placenta, okay, in here, takes over the role of producing polyprogesterone. So the pregnancy can be maintained and not miscarried. So even though the corpus luteum break down, the placenta still maintains poly. Okay. I'm hoping that's given you a really quick insight into our hormones and how they impact our menstrual cycle and to some extent fertility. It would be of great help if you can like and share this video if you found it useful. And you never know who in your group of friends might actually need to hear it. Now, if you would like to know more about me or working with me, then there's going to be a link below, and you can click on that to find out how you can get in touch. So until next time, thanks heaps, and enjoy your weekend.